people who don't work in engineering, they often get surprised when engineers talk about, hey, how creative can this work actually be? So it does combine the creativity, the way how you can individually work on your own, combined with some human interaction. And it requires certain level of knowledge and hyper focus. And hyper focus is one of the things neurodivergent people are known for, especially if you have autism or ADHD.
Hi, welcome Anita. I'd love to talk to you about neurodiversity today. So first off, what is that for people that might not understand it?
That is a very good question, and I'm happy you're asking because often I jump into the topic without really explaining. The way how I explain it, neurodiversity is different ways how our brains are wired. So there are people we call neurotypicals whose brains are wired general ways. That's around 80% of population, and around 15 to 20% population are what we call neurodivergents, whose brains are wired differently. It doesn't mean they're better or worse. It's just different. Like you would have a different eye color, a different hair color, different physical appearances. It's the same with brains who just work in a bit of different way.
Cool. So as you were saying that, so I was scribbling my notes thinking 80-20. That sounds almost as though there's a binary choice. Is it binary or is there a spectrum?
It is definitely a spectrum, and the numbers are not really representative because actually it's a rather new phenomenon. If we look at human biology, it's something which has only been researched in less than last 100 years. So if you ask me, I think the numbers are actually much higher, especially in software engineering. And it obviously depends on the culture where the research has been done. So far, most of the research is done in the Western world. So those 15 to 20% come from there. Although neurodivergence exists anywhere in the world, there are just not reliable statistics how many of them would be in countries where this is more of a taboo. And it's spectrum in a way that you can have more than one diagnosis. There are around 15 to 20 different diagnoses at this point, but you can have one, you can have two, you can have three. You can also be diagnosed at a later age of life. You can have very few symptoms of one diagnosis. You can have loads of them. So the spectrum is so huge, which also makes it sometimes hard to talk about the needs of the whole community because it is so diverse.
You say that it's been researched over the last 100 years. It feels that even within my lifetime, so looking back over, say, the last 40 years, we've become far more aware of these issues. I'm thinking now it's like Richard Branson famously described at school. I think he was described as dumb or stupid and incapable.
No.
Where realistically, he got a diagnosis late in life of being dyslexic. And clearly that's not held him back from being successful. So it feels definitely that's something that we're only recently starting to properly understand.
I think when you look at autism research, for example, which started in the years 30s in Germany and the US, in the first years, it was mostly looked at something what only children have and not adults, what only young boys would have and not girls, and also something which has only disadvantages. When we talk about autism, dyslexia, ADHD, or any other condition nowadays, there is getting more focus on actually what are the strengths of people who have those diagnoses. So the shift is changing, it is happening, but there's still way too many stereotypes, wrong assumptions, and definitely people who don't feel comfortable sharing it or talking about it because of how society will be reacting to them.
Hopefully society is changing and getting better. So you mentioned some strengths there, and I've met a few people who are neurodivergent and have been recruited specifically for their strengths. Can you tell us what some of those strengths are and why we should look for them in software teams?
Well, obviously, I don't want to generalize that everybody would have the strengths, so I will be using some stereotypes in the next few minutes. Apologies in advance, but what you see in general are people who are neurodivergent. They can be more creative because they have learned to think out of the box. They have learned to adapt. They can better sometimes read the room and read the signals others would be missing because they have been learning to do it since they were kids, often unintentionally and not really aware of what they're doing, but that just being their coping mechanism. When you look at people with autism, for example, there is the general perception that they pay much more attention to detail. They're super, super honest, so you can really expect good feedback. There are quite a few, indeed, companies which are specialized in hiring people with autism, for example, for testing software, because they see those small things not everybody would see. And again, I'm generalizing, and it doesn't hold for every single person who has autism in general, but you do see as quite some similarities. When you look at people who have ADHD, for example, they can get super creative, have loads of brainstorming ideas, loads of ideas you would never think of yourself if you were neurotypical. So they can think in much more abstract and complex things and faster come up with solutions where other people might need more time. And so on and so on. But again, obviously, it's generalizing, and every person might have their own strengths.
And as you say, there's 15 or 20 different aspects to this, and every single one is a spectrum. So it's not like you're either this or that. There are degrees to all of these things. You mentioned creative a couple of times there. What do you mean by that? Because I think that's something that's really misunderstood. We have a lot of debates about whether someone or something is creative or not. So, can we define creativity in this context?
I'm afraid I cannot define it, but when I use word creative, I usually mean thinking out of box. And let's take people who are dyslexic, for example. The general stereotype is, oh, these people just have troubles with reading and writing. And that's where it stops. But when you actually talk with somebody who is dyslexic and you say, what does it really mean for you? How does that influence your life? You often see that they think visually, where I love reading books and I'm not dyslexic. So for me, every word, I can see it in front of my eyes. So I don't think visually at all. I think in letters and sentences and commas. And if there is a comma missing, I can complain for hours. But from what I hear with people who do have dyslexia, instead of thinking of text, they can really good imagine how would a diagram look like. How can we make it visually easy for people? And think about those terrible, boring PowerPoint presentations we have all seen where there are way too many bullet points. A dyslexic person could be taking that and creating a really nice visual presentation where we actually see it in pictures, and where picture can explain much more than those terrible bullet points which none of us are reading. And those are the strengths they could be having. They can also think, hey, how can we create a website, for example, instead of having too much text? How can we make it more intuitive for people so they automatically know where to look at and where to press the buttons instead of needing to read super long filters and descriptions and God knows what else.
Right. Interesting. I was not aware of that. And I'm also now paranoid about using any of my writing because I'm sure I have many missing commas. Okay, so what are the other strengths that neurodiversity can bring to a software engineering team?
Um, I think neurodiversity brings the same strengths what any diverse team in general could be having. And as that is different mindset, different experiences, different views. So when you are writing the code and thinking about the best ways how to implement it, you wouldn't be all looking at the same way and working in the ways you have been working for years before. Every single person with different background, with different knowledge, brings a new perspective. And if you have been coding the same way for 20 years, you might not really be aware of the new trends happening or the new things, other programming languages. And with every new addition, either they're neurodivergent or not, they bring those perspectives, which are super important to consider and open up and say, hey, actually, we could be also doing it in a much easier way. We could be saving time through implementing things we were not considering. And obviously, neurodiversity doesn't come with strengths. There are also some, I wouldn't call it weaknesses, but challenges you need to be aware of and adapt. But it's never black or white.
And that's true for all of us, isn't it? We all have strengths and we all have areas that are not as strong. Again, they don't necessarily have to weaknesses, but nobody's skill level is level of brilliant. We'll all have some sort of jaggedness where maybe we're better at social interactions, maybe we're better at algorithmic skills, maybe we're better at visual things. So, it's jagged for all of us. So how can we make teams more inclusive and make them better at finding that neurodiversity, so we get that diverse thought, that diverse live experience, and that diverse approach, so we can build better software from it?
One of my favorite ways how to look at it when I'm hiring for a new team member is to hire not for cultural fit, but to hire for cultural add-on. Somebody said that sentence to me a few years ago, and it really stuck with me. Think you have a team of X amount of team members, and you have a place for new one. Instead of hiring somebody who thinks exactly like you, who really resonates, maybe you have similar background, similar education, companies you have worked for, hire somebody you might not really click in the first few minutes, for somebody who brings a different and fresh perspective, so you can have those diverse conversations. Obviously, it needs to be somebody who is professional enough, and you can have a good communication and you can work together. So don't hire somebody you would really totally hate, but somebody who is different enough. And that sounds simple, but at the same time, a lot of people don't dare it. And they often unintentionally hire somebody who copy pastes them. And then you end up in a very homogeneous team. Um, Everybody having the same skin color, having the same gender, having the same age, maybe the similar education background. And what kind of diversity can we talk on?
So one of the problems that I've noticed with that is when I've been hiring, and I haven't done it for a few years, but when I've been hiring in the past, quite often the difficulty has been getting enough candidates through the pipeline. So I have always felt excited when I find somebody that met our standard, because like finally we found someone. I haven't had a chance to look at anything beyond do they meet our standard, because there's so few people that did. A lot of that has been recruiting through agents, so maybe they were doing some filtering and stuff that I didn't see. But how do we bring in a more diverse candidate base? What are the things that we can do to remove whatever blockers are causing that we get so few different candidates?
I suggest to start with reviewing the job listing. Based on the research I have read, a lot of job listings are written in a way that it would discourage women to apply, and also quite some neurodivergence. And what do I mean? I have read research that when men read a vacancy and they see they're matching 60-70% of the requirements, they'll just apply. When women read it, they need to feel that they're matching 100%. If there's even one bullet point they're not comfortable about, they would not apply. But we all know the reality that the job listings, they don't always match to what you're really looking for. Some numbers are twisted. Hey, we need somebody senior. How many years experience would it be? And you just figure out a number which might actually not be what you're really looking for. I have seen vacancies which are requiring somebody to have a university degree for a software engineering job. No, in my opinion, you don't need university degree. You need some relevant job experience if you're hiring for a meteor. If they have studied or not, that's irrelevant as long as they know how to code. Sure, you might need somebody who thinks on a relevant level, but that doesn't require going to university. So there are quite some ways how you can really adapt your job listing to really match what you're looking for, being honest, and at the same time being open enough to different candidates and different views, and also knowing where to look for them. It's not enough to just post job listing on LinkedIn, because there's so many of them and not everybody uses LinkedIn the same way. So it's also going out and looking for those people who are not applying. And sure, I have also been hiring for quite a few years for my teams in the hiring panel. Getting even women to come to job interviews super hard. So yeah, it's hard to get enough of them if they don't apply. We also know there are not enough of them studying engineering or knowing how to code, especially in Western Europe. The numbers are a bit higher in some other countries. So sure, then you also cannot expect it if you just put the LinkedIn vacancy and do nothing else. So you need to be a bit proactive to know what you're looking for and how to get those marginalized groups to apply.
Absolutely. And I could not agree more on the matching job advert. I have in the past applied for ads where I've matched the top two or three things and I've ignored the rest because there's a shopping list. There's a shopping list of like 90 different tech stacks or whatever, and I think nobody's going to know all that. But you've listed these two or three at the top, so they're going to be the core things, and I'm really strong on that. Um, I equally, I have taken at least 2 jobs in my life where I did not match any of the job spec.
Oh, wow.
One of which I didn't even apply because even I'm fairly confident I'll apply for anything if I'm looking and it sounds interesting to me. There's some that I just did not match at all, didn't apply for. I saw the company advertising for at least 6 months, and then somebody contacted me and said, "Hey, you've worked with some of these guys before. Can I introduce you and have you talk to them?" And I went and talked to them, and ended up working for them for a couple of years in that role. And in that role, I never used any of the skills that were on the job ad. So the entire thing was a complete mismatch. And, they'd create a problem for themselves. They were late in delivering because they hadn't found the person with the skills they thought they needed. So, yeah, there's real problems there that we create for ourselves as hiring managers and organizations when we're doing it. And I'm with you. It's kind of difficult at the moment with the way the recruiting is to encourage people to apply if they're not a good match. Because equally, if you're not a good match, there are so many people submitting perfectly tailored CVs that appear to be a good match. You're maybe not even going to get this interview and find out. But I think we should encourage people to apply more. We should also encourage people to cut down the job advert and actually list what you really need. And in many ways, that shouldn't be a long list of frameworks or technologies. If you're hiring software engineers, they should be able to come in and pick up most of those skills. And you want to find the core skills and the ability to do the job well, rather than 20 different technologies in your stack which they may barely touch or they could read the documentation for. So is there anything else apart from the job advert that we do which discourages people?
When we talk about software engineering teams, from what I have gathered, for engineers, environment is very important. And my personal experience shows that the amount of neurodivergence in software engineering is much higher than the 15 to 20% average. So you get you get a bunch of neurodivergents who come with their own different backgrounds and preferences. And obviously, there are loads of remote works where the situation is a bit different. I work in the office with loads of neurodivergents, and I notice that often the way how office is set up is not really made for success for people who are neurodivergent. Think of open plan offices, terrible sound isolation, actually no sound isolation, let's be more clear. Your desk being in the middle of everything where anybody can pass by you. You don't feel it, you don't see it, you don't have your safe space, which is usually um, with some wall behind you in a bit in a corner where you can have a good overview. Noise canceling headphones, not too many people in the same room. Those are the things loads of neurodivergence would benefit. And not only neurodivergence, a regular average software engineer would really appreciate that as well. But instead, we keep creating those offices. I have worked with office, which was, I don't know, 100 people in the same room, maybe more. I don't know how I survived there for years. I think I was young and didn't know that anything better is possible. Now I admire how we did it. But you really see that those kind of places make you wonder, hey, how can I be coming here several days in a row. Obviously, after COVID, there is more flexible working from home, 100% remote jobs, but still, at least in Netherlands, I see quite a lot of offices who do require you to come in a majority of your time. And then you do need to have this workplace which does fit your needs, and not only fit, which makes you thrive, actually. And I don't think that people who um, create those offices that they even consider it. It's not that they don't want to; they just don't know enough to think about it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I can think of several places I've worked where there's been 100 people packed into an open plan office, and I'm a morning person, so quite often when I worked in those places, I would get there at 7:30, latest 8 o'clock in the morning, depending how far I'd commuted. And I would love the first couple of hours when the office was quiet before most people came in, and I have the room almost to myself, and I could focus. And that would be my most productive time of the day when I'd get a load done. And then it'd drop off massively as the hustle and bustle picked up. There were some great aspects of it, though, in that I enjoyed the social element, and I'm a great believer in pair and mob programming. So having the ability to collaborate with people was great, but it always felt as though it was coming at quite a trade-off when you're crowded in that space and you've got all that noise, all the distractions of people walking past and other conversations going on that maybe are not related to what you're doing. You mentioned there that you think that we have a higher than usual um, range of neurodivergent people in software. Why do you think that is?
I was expecting this question to come, and I still, years after, I don't have an answer to this. But I do think one of my assumptions is that writing code requires certain skills not everybody possesses, and it does give you the necessary creativity. It's people who don't work in engineering, they often get surprised when engineers talk about, hey, how creative can this work actually be? So it does combine the creativity, the way how you can individually work on your own, combined with some human interaction. And it requires certain level of knowledge and hyper focus. And hyper focus is one of the things neurodivergent people are known for, especially if you have autism or ADHD. So you deep dive into this one topic, you're in your own world, and you can get really good at it. And often, from what I hear about neurotypicals, they get faster distracted. They need those several different things to be thinking, and they wouldn't be able to have 8 hours just coding and thinking about this one puzzle piece you have. And again, stereotypes, generalizing, but I think coding stimulates your brain and stimulates your interest into something specific, which resonates to neurodivergence. And let's be honest, I think computers and the general stereotype we have about hobbies young teenagers have, there is some correlation as well. From what I hear from a lot of my colleagues, they play video games as well, which again, some connection to that. I'm not a video game person at all, so that's not my obsession. I have enough of other ones, but I can see some parallels there.
Yeah, I think the creative thing really stands out. The other one I've noticed is that a lot of us got into software because we wanted to deal with a computer that was very logical, very rational, followed instructions, and was not as difficult to deal with as people. Do you think that plays into it?
I think for people with autism, that definitely plays a role. Also because lots of communication is happening asynchronously or written, so there is more time to think, more time to consider. You can reply without seeing first person's emotions and facial expressions. I think that also helps. For people with other conditions, I'm not really sure how important the logical part is. If you take ADHD, for example, I don't really see correlations there, but we still have loads of engineers who have ADHD. So I think that's something where there should be still more research done. Again, it's a relatively new field. There is more and more research happening, but there's so many spectrums of neurodiversity that software engineering is still not the top focus. Also, I think one of the reasons is because it's one of the few places where people can really have a good I want to say good life, but I mean meaningful life. They get paid, they earn their own money, they do something meaningful, while loads of the majority of neurodivergents are not able to work. They need to find ways how to do something with their life out of paid employment. And that usually is more interesting for research because they want to see how those people could still contribute to the society. So hopefully in the next years, more information, more research, and more knowledge.
Yeah, let's hope so. With the idea that AI is going to come in and write more of the code and allow us to work, not quite in agreement with this, but let's, for argument's sake, say the higher level of abstraction. And we're going to do less of the coding and be more like a manager of agents rather than getting into the detail. How do you think that that's going to affect the workforce and the balance neurotypical to neurodivergent?
I have never thought about how will AI affect neurodivergence, so I'm thinking of what I have heard of others saying. I know I have quite some engineers who are super excited about AI, but those are not the neurodivergent ones. I haven't heard neurodivergents talking a lot about them, but I know in general in engineering world, where I am, AI is a big hype. Everybody's talking about. Everybody's happy to try it. I might be the only person in the universe who hasn't done it, and I'm planning to keep it that way because otherwise I'll get to the hyper focus where there's nothing else I will be doing except doing AI. So I can get obsessed way too easily with my neurodivergent brain. So better not to get into it. But I actually that could be one of the challenges for neurodivergents who get obsessed with one topic, that AI will take over their whole life. And I'm exaggerating, but I think we have all heard in the news enough about unfortunate cases where people have made bad life choices with terrible ending because of their conversations with AI. And if you are not at some point not able to filter enough what's truth and what not, and what's your logical brain saying versus AI, whom you have trusted for several weeks and days, I do see some challenges there for people whose mental health is more is weaker or more vulnerable than the general population.
Yes, there's definitely some challenges there. There's been a, I don't quite have the right word for it, but there's been a program on British television for the last week or two, ongoing series about AI with Professor Hannah Fry, a mathematician, I believe, who's looking at this. And it's been quite eye opening how people can get engrossed in the AIs and really start feeling that they have a relationship with them. And it is quite worrying. I think there's a number of challenges that we need to deal with there that are very complex, outside my area of expertise, I'm afraid. So maybe we can bring this a little bit back to recruitment. How can we change our recruitment processes so that we're more inclusive?
It took for hours and hours about it, so I'll try to summarize. Let's start with knowing what the recruitment process look like. It's getting better in the last years, and there are a lot of companies who take you step by step. We have this amount of steps. This is what will happen in each step. This is how long will it take, so people know really good what to expect and they can prepare for it. There are also loads of companies who don't do it, and you just keep going to interview and interview and not knowing what the goal of it is, who will be in the panel, what kind of questions will be asked to you. That's not really helpful for a neurodivergent brain who is already worried enough about the job interview, and then having all the surprises coming up, that's just getting it worse. So I think having clear expectations written on the website, sending in advance what's the goal of each step, who are the people who will be interviewing you, so you can look them up, do some research, prepare some questions, making sure there is time for questions, and it really feels like a conversation and not really like a police interrogation. And for software engineers, especially, live coding challenges can be quite bad. Let's put it this way, because they can just freeze. And when you would have actually a really good software engineer who is great at their work and great working, if you leave them alone, they would not be performing in this live coding challenge where there's somebody looking behind your shoulder as you type every single letter. That's just terrible. I also know companies who don't do coding challenges at all and only hire somebody based on their soft skills and interviewing. That's a different spectrum I wouldn't want to go in, because we all know there are people who are great at doing their job and terrible at having human conversations. So it's always finding the right balance. And if you do a coding challenge, then give it to that person on, let them do a day or two at their own space at home, send back to you. And obviously, there are people who might be um, cheat or ask somebody else, but then you ask them the questions during the interview. And if they wrote the codes themselves, they are able to answer why did you make the choice A, B, and C. And because you're asking them questions about their job, about something concrete, that's much easier to answer to the questions than what was the biggest challenge you experienced in your previous workplace, and what would your colleagues be telling about you? Yeah, how do I know? Go and ask them. Like those hypothetical questions, they don't really work very well for neurodivergence.
Yeah, I resonate with some of that. I've seemed to, and this is great when I'm trying to do demos to people, I seem to lose the ability to type when somebody's watching me. I've only been typing for 40 odd years, but it suddenly looks like it's the first time I've seen a keyboard occasionally when I'm doing it with somebody looking over my shoulder.
And you just
Um,
keep making super basic mistakes you otherwise wouldn't make.
yes, I've struggled to spell simple 4 and 5 letter words. Okay, or struggled to type them. Yeah, the interviewing one is interesting. I have a couple of friends that I know who've been asked things like, "What would your past colleagues or your past managers say about you?" And they've answered them brutally honestly, and it doesn't reflect
Oh
well on
no.
them.
Yeah, I did that mistake once when I was still a bit younger and I didn't know how to translate my neurodivergent brain, or I didn't know I'm neurodivergent in the first place. And they asked something about, like, what would you be struggling in the workplace or so? And I honestly said, I don't like social gatherings and small talks at the coffee corner. Yeah, I didn't get hired.
Which is it's a mistake because people are being honest with you, and those people have a lot to offer. I can't quite remember what it was, but one of my friends said his ex-manager would describe him as difficult. I was his ex-manager, and that was true, but difficult in the light way because they raised issues and challenged things and made us spot gaps in what we're doing, so we did a better job as a result of it. So yes, they were difficult, but in a good way that we valued and was contributed to the team. They didn't get offered that job, and I think that company lost out because that was such a badly phrased question. But that brings me to one of my bugbears with recruitment. I've been a manager for many years in lots of different organizations, and every organization that gave me management training, it was always around, this is how you fire people, this is how you manage poor performance. And that was really annoying me because I don't want to deal with poor performance. I want to know how I hire the right people, how I hire people properly in the first place. And I think that that's a real area that we need to train people in, because a lot of hiring is cargo culting what big tech does, or just copying how they were interviewed early in their career with no thought to how important it is and how we do it well. And then the other part of management training is I want to have training on management of how to create a good, successful team, not how to fire someone when it goes wrong, because it's never entirely their fault. If you're firing someone, you've got the wrong environment, or you've hired the wrong person into the wrong role. You've not used them effectively. You've not created the right environment. So there have been once or twice when I can say it's mostly somebody's fault because something that a change they made in their life or some bad decisions they made, but most of the time it's not been as black and white as that. There's been some factors on both sides that needed to be addressed. So given we lack that training, do you think there's something that managers can do to go and educate themselves on how to better interview and do better at hiring?
I think there's loads what can be done by managers. And let's start with even with the fact, why do managers need to be the ones to hire? I am very agile in my and very self-organizing in my ways of thinking. Well, maybe that's why I'm an agilist, but I think the team should be hiring. Sure, manager is involved. Manager knows what the budgets are, what's the company goals for the next 5 years, and so on. But the team should be the ones knowing what they're actually missing, what kind of skill sets they should be. They should be the ones being able to choose their team members. And luckily, it's happening more and more. And in every company I work for, I keep changing their hiring practices. So at least my teams get to have a say. But how often have we heard that you get a message, hey, you will have a new team member joining in X weeks, and you have never seen that person? They might be great person, but terrible team fit because the managers are not there every day with you. They have way too many people to manage. They cannot keep a track on what is actually really needed and have those conversations. So let's start with the team knowing what they're looking for. And obviously, that also means that the team needs to be trained how to have those conversations, how to hire, what to look for, what kind of questions to ask. So the whole process should be revamped to being more linear instead of the top down. And let's be honest, we have seen loads of great engineers who have been promoted to being managers and become less great managers. So we have actually lost a good engineer and a good manager. Uh, and then they don't get training how to hire or how to manage. Well, usually they get training how to manage, which is like way too late, but training on how to hire, that happens way too little. So there is so much more what needs to be happening with recruitment working together with management and the teams, everybody getting the necessary training, the necessary knowledge, and really bringing back to the people with whom you will be working on a daily basis. So whenever I look for a new job and I go to interviews, that's one of my questions. Can I speak with people with whom I will be working on a daily basis? And if they say no, because we don't really know yet, or the team is not there yet, and I always say, okay, can I talk with any engineer at least, instead of me talking only to managers? Because whatever they say, I take it with a pinch of salt.
That's a great point. I have tried to do that in some organizations, and sometimes it's gone well. Sometimes I've had pushback from the engineers that say, I don't want to interview people. I want to write code. I don't want more meetings. I don't want to be involved in that. How do you balance that in that it is important, I think, to have the team have a say, and it is important to, interviews are a two-way process. They should partly be about, is this the right person for us? And partly about selling that person on the company, which should happen even if they're not necessarily the right person for you, because they might have friends or other colleagues that would be right for the company. They might be a future customer. So every time you interact with someone, you are still promoting your team and the organization. So it should leave people with a positive experience. But coming back to my key point, if your engineers don't want to be involved in the interview process, how can you bring them on board for that and or provide them the support or achieve that balance so somebody does speak to the engineers?
That's a very valid point. And to be honest, I think the engineers who don't want to be involved, in my experience, that's less than 10%. Most of people do wanna know a bit more than just writing codes. They know why it's important. They want to see the bigger picture. And as long as you explain them what are the benefits and how this will help in their work, it will make sense. Nobody wants to have 4 hour long meetings, sure, but having a 30-minute chat where you get to say, if you were the hiring manager, would you hire that person, yes or no, together with the rest of the panel? I haven't really had people who say no so far. If they are, sure, maybe not everybody needs to be involved. If you have a big team, get to talk with 2 or 3 people. And as long as the team trusts that those 2 or 3 people can make choice on behalf of the whole team, that's also fine. I have also had calls where the whole team was present, but only 1 or 2 persons were talking, and the rest were just listening. That's also totally fine. You don't need to be the most extroverted person, but at least you get to give afterwards a decision based on what I heard. This is how I feel about it. But again, the stereotypes that engineers only want to write the code, I think it does exist, but it's also very, very wrong, and it's quite some minority. there are companies where you obviously spend most of your time writing code, but I have worked for enough international companies where you spend a lot of time gathering requirements on your own, discussing as a possible solutions with as a customers directly, being involved in a user research, where writing code is only part of your job. That's not for everybody, sure, but the percentages can really fluctuate company per company, and that actually would be one of the questions an engineer should ask when they go to a job interview. How much time will I be spending doing other things which is not directly coding, so they can make the right decision for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Is there anything we haven't talked about that we should cover?
One of the questions I often get related to recruitment is, should I be disclosing my diagnosis during the job process? And I admire people who ask it. I admire them wanting to do it. I always ask the question back, what do you want to gain based on it? And depending on that, you can see if you should or should not be disclosing. If you want to know an honest answer how neuro inclusive is the company, go ahead, share it and see how they react. It might you tell already a lot about the company. And if they don't offer you a job based on that, you probably wouldn't want to work for them anyway, because you would need to keep yourself in the closet. If you want to make sure that they are inclusive enough in terms of their thinking, that question wouldn't really tell a lot. So I always say, think about why you want to um, ask it and ask the question behind it. Maybe you should, let's say you have certain accommodations necessary. For example, you really need the wall behind your desk and noise canceling phones instead of whatever your diagnosis would be. Ask if they're able to accommodate that. Imagine you need more flexible working environment because 5 days in the office is just going to drain your social battery. Ask how many days per week can you work from home. And I think those questions are much more meaningful because they will really tell you how much the company can accommodate you. No one person with the same diagnosis is the same. So if they will start comparing you with John, who also works for the company and has the same diagnosis, they might be getting totally different conclusions who you are, because you might be on a different side of the spectrum as that John. So that's always something to really think about and frame it in a way that's beneficial for you. Obviously, companies are not allowed to discriminate based on your medical history, but the reality is what it is. So you should choose what's the best for you.
I think that's a great approach because thinking about it from the other side of the table, if somebody told me their diagnosis, I don't have a great deal of expertise in that. It's not necessarily going to tell me what I need to know to accommodate them, where actually then telling me, I'd like to better ensure that I'm sat in the corner of the wall behind me, or I prefer to work with noise cancelling headphones on most of the time. That's something that I can understand and answer questions genuinely about, and we can, I can give you the right answer. So maybe it sets it up for a better conversation from both sides.
That's exactly one of the first questions I ask when somebody is opening up and sharing their diagnosis with me, especially at workplace. I'm saying, what issues are you struggling with? Where do you need help? What should I consider when working together with you? Not always people know answers, but then it's also, let me pay extra attention to that person and how they're working so I can come up with suggestions on my own. I have had a colleague who was very neurodivergent, and he was getting easily distracted, but to the point that he was distracting other people by how distracted he was appearing. Like, you could see that his mind is just wandering away, and he was often working remote. So I said, could you please turn your video camera off? Because it's fine, you're getting distracted. After a few minutes, you'll get back on the track, we'll continue conversation. But other people get distracted because of as your video. So if it's off and you just are on audio, we will continue having a good conversation. That's something he wouldn't have thought on his own, because he also doesn't see the effect on other people. Um, and it's an easy conversation instead of saying, could you please leave the room and come back when you're focused? No, that's not really a nice way how to frame it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And again, I've seen managers in some of the companies I've dealt with recently insist that everyone has their video on for
God.
calls. And again, that's really lacking that awareness and accommodation of the fact that we're all different. We need to find the right balance.
I think for people who have never thought about neurodiversity in their lives and who have worked the same way for 20, 30, 40 years, I really trust it super hard because that's something they never heard about. It was all going fine until now. So why suddenly there's this big issues, this big topic? We need to be super inclusive, need to adapt ABCD. I can totally understand that that's way too much for them to handle as well. But the reality is, the society is changing. Neurodivergence are not a new thing. We have always existed. It's just now there is more free space to talk and really be who yourself are. So instead of masking and coping with the society and the world, which is not really built for you, you can finally start getting those small accommodations you need, which would help most of people either way. But it's still a long way to go. And I would hope that with new generation and with the topic being more open, there will slowly by slowly happen more and more change, the same as you see some other topics being more openly discussed nowadays.
Let's hope so, because there is also plenty of evidence that having a diverse team and having that diversity gives you a stronger team that are more productive and that will innovate more. So it's in the interest of both parties to make this really work.
If you don't do anything, you will hire neurodivergents anyway. You'll just not know they're neurodivergent, and you will end up having low performers who are struggling and making all your team to struggle. So it's not that they will go away if you don't do anything. They'll be there anyways.
Yeah, so you might as well get the best out of them and build your team successfully and make it a win-win for everyone. Thanks very much for that, Anita. If anyone wants to talk to you a bit more and learn a bit more, I know you're doing a number of talks on this. How can they follow you? How can they get in touch? Where's the best place to see some of your talks?
The
And
best
we'll
way
put the
would
links
be,
in the show notes, so you don't
yeah,
need to spell any URLs out.
that's super simple. My name and surname is unique. There's nobody else with it. So just look me up in LinkedIn. You can follow me. If you want to connect, please do add the message that you have seen me on John's podcast, because I don't accept random invitations. And just drop a message and I'll be happy to chat about whatever.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Anita. Been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me, John.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.